Luxury Staffing, the podcast by Morgan and Mallet.
Hello there, podcast listeners. In today's episode of the Luxury Staffing podcast by Morgan and Mallet, we've got Nikki Beauchamp. She's a senior global real estate advisor, and she's going to be guiding us today with a lot of information all about the New York high-end luxury market. And we're going to be covering all the ins and outs of this specific area. So before we jump into the questions that I did send over, would you mind just giving us a brief introduction of like how you got into real estate and where you're working now and what you do like on a day-to-day basis, if that's all right?
Absolutely. So I am born and raised in New York. I had my first career was actually in finance and technology, and I got into real estate essentially by accident. As someone who was born and raised here, I was always the person in every room at every company that you would ask about living New York. Where should I live? What should I do? And I would refer them to a very good friend of mine at the time who this goes on for several years. They recommend that I should get my license so that they can pay a referral fee to me for the business that I'm generating. And I continue to insist that no, it's okay. I don't want to do that. It's fine. The friend in question drove up to my holiday party in a car and said, like, your business that you sent me this quarter paid for my car. If you have a license, you can be paid a referral fee. So that's why I got my license. And then I sold my consulting practice and decided that I would try to start a real estate business. And here I still am 20 some odd years later. So that's
Amazing.
kind of the short version of this was not my original intent, but I have loved every moment of it. It's been incredibly rewarding to work with people at different stages of their lives.
What's your favorite part about real estate in New York?
I think my favorite part might be figuring out how or where someone's ideal property or neighborhood is. And I think that people often have preconceptions about where they want to be, and it's a very narrow range. But knowing the market inside and out, if you describe a property to me that does not exist in that neighborhood, but it exists in a different neighborhood, we have a developed trust where I might be able to say, well, can we try this? Can we just try and go and see? And I would like you to explore. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't work out. But still, the idea I can hear what you're expressing to me and try to match it. That is a big part of what I do every day. And I love it's like solving a puzzle.
Yeah,
Every
yeah.
puzzle.
Absolutely. This sounds like when I chat with the recruiters, when they say that a principal will come in and they say, okay, I need a person to do this, 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 and this. And then the recruiter might say, well, actually, that sounds like you might need a part-time chauffeur and a governess, for example, or
Right.
maybe a traveling butler or personal assistant to do these roles. So yeah, it seems quite um, like this matching and the puzzle solving, it seems quite similar. But for people outside New York, what actually defines luxury real estate in the city right now? And how is it different from luxury anywhere else?
So there's a finite amount of space in New York, and much of our housing stock is vertical, sort of, large high rises and such. It's not only about the property, it's about the building, how the building is run, and where the building is located, and then how that neighborhood ties to how you want to live your life. So this is why this discussion about how you want to live, what matters to you most, and then trying to piece things together. Because I will sometimes have people say, well, I want to be on Park Avenue. Let's discuss and deconstruct this. First of all, we have condos, co-ops, and townhouses, and that is a very key distinction because each of those has its own governing policies and processes by which you purchase. I have clients who have joked that buying a co-op was more invasive of a process than merging two companies because the level of financial disclosure and reference letters, etc. And we may have that conversation. You may say to me, you know what, Nikki, I am not interested in disclosing that level of information to essentially a group of strangers. You probably don't want a co-op. You will probably want to purchase a condo. We may look at different buildings. And again, you may say to me, you know what? I'm still not interested in that level of disclosure. And we might pivot and say, perhaps we need to look at new construction and new develop where you may be buying off plan from the sponsor and you are not disclosing that layer of information. So that's why these consultations and these conversations matter so much to get a real temperature for someone's preferences.
Interesting. What is a co-op?
A co-op, let's use the example of there is a building that owns the land that it sits on and there are 10 apartments and are 100 shares. Let's say each apartment, for simplicity's sake, each apartment is allocated 10 shares. So when you are purchasing in a co-op, you are not purchasing real estate. You are purchasing shares in the corporation that owns the building.
Wow. Okay.
And then in exchange for those shares, you are receiving what's called a proprietary lease, which allows you occupancy of the unit that's tied to those shares for as long as you own those shares. But now, when you turn around and you are interested in selling, the individual who is purchasing essentially is presenting a prospectus about themselves, their financial history, assets, including you can't just say, I have a Picasso and it's worth $20 million, hypothetically. You have to have the substantiated backup for every asset that you claim and every liability. So I had quite famously I had a board package a couple of years back where delivering it to the managing agent required several boxes of several reams of copy paper. The original package was about 1,500 single-sided pages,
My word.
plus or minus.
Wow.
So that's a co-op. Condo, it's real property. You own the space. You have townhouses and single and brownstones. But that's sort of the mix. But the challenge is that in New York City, we still have more co-ops generally than condos and townhouses. And each of those has its different levels of service. If you are buying a townhouse, that is just privacy and discretion to the max. But also, this comes to the conversation about staffing, where I have conversations with my owners like, well, I want to buy a townhouse, but I need someone to manage it. I need someone that I can call and let them know that my family, we're coming into town and we want to make sure that everything is stocked and ready to go. So that's often where I do recommend household managers and property managers so that they can replicate having full-time staff or someone to engage with to prepare the residents when they are coming to either live or visit for an extended period of time.
That's interesting. Yeah. And why are co-ops more common in New York as compared to other places?
Just from a historical perspective, when that was the dominant form of when we had rental houses. We also have rentals. I forgot to include that. And then you had apartments that were converted into cooperatives, and the condominium is a more modern construct. So it's just a historical element for the most part. I like to think that if the idea of condominiums had existed much earlier, perhaps that may have swayed things.
Okay. And just moving on to next question. When a high net worth buyer comes to you, what are they really looking for beyond square footage or a good view?
I think it's also what does your life look like? So I have a client that number of years ago said, well, when we're in New York, we basically like to spend all our time, all of our friends are in this neighborhood, and we like to be able to leave our apartment and walk and go to dinner at this restaurant, that restaurant, and that restaurant. I want to be able to just pop up very quickly and go to the museums. So we narrow down, and this particular client is like, well, then I would like to be west of Lexington between 70th and 81st. How you live your life is
Gotcha.
really incredibly important. And I think that holds true for all facets of real estate. And I think the challenge with a place like New York City is that often, until you start spending more time and exploring more, you may have a vision that is only one neighborhood. And as you explore, you may discover there are other neighborhoods that are very appealing to you, or you may discover, I love that it's easy for me to get there, but I do not want to live in that neighborhood. And that is also fine as well.
Now, you did mention townhouses for somebody who values privacy and discretion. Are there any other options on the market for a buyer who has those who values privacy and discretion very highly?
There are other options, but I think it comes down to, if you are going to be living in a vertical environment, what does that look like? Does the building only have 10 residences? Okay, that might be appealing to you, but I have clients who literally will say, I do not want to have a neighbor below me and a neighbor above me. Like, I do not want to live in a vertical environment where there are other neighbors and I have to coordinate and I have to follow their rules and we have to have all this. Some people don't want that. So if that is not at all remotely appealing, yeah, townhouses often end up being where what they decide on.
Interesting. Moving on to my next question. Board approvals are famous for being tough, even with the very wealthy. What surprises your clients most about that process? Is it the invasiveness, for example?
It's the invasiveness and also understanding that every building has different things that they are looking for, and every building has different financial requirements. The idea that if you're like, well, I see apartment X right around the corner from where I am, 781 Fifth Avenue. And you'll say, well, I want that apartment. I have enough money. And it goes, well, do you really? Because if the building requires certain multiples of the purchase price, do you have enough liquidity? Because it's not just about the purchase price, it's about all of the other things that the building is looking for, including post-closing liquidity. Sometimes it is, multiples of the purchase price. There are some buildings where you can finance part of the purchase. There are buildings where you cannot. There are buildings where you must put down at least, 50% down. So every building is its own little ecosystem. So having to have that conversation and then dig deeper. And again, a lot of my clients will honestly decide. I think the discretion and the level of disclosure is what I have found has been most challenging for my buyers.
It sounds like there's a lot of added friction to the purchasing process. And my only sort of like logic here is that they can do this, or the boards, the co-ops, whoever can implement and insist on all this friction because there is an insane amount of demand. There's, as you said right at the
Well,
beginning.
not even just an insane amount of demand. It said think about how I try to explain this is, think about every co-op as its own privately held. You all own the company, you can decide what your rules are. And that is usually how the easiest way that I have found to explain it to my clients.
Mhm.
And also, they do not have to tell you why they have turned down. And I
Interesting.
think and that's the biggest challenge is that often as wealth increases and there's this idea that anything is accessible because everything has a price. And then we have this subset of housing type in New York City where Not that it doesn't matter how much money you have, but they can still say no. That is so challenging. Obviously, unless we had fair housing laws and everybody has to abide by the fair housing laws. But outside of that, your board package is your prospectus to this group of owners. And that's how I approach, I think that the preparation of the package and explaining your assets in a manner that does not create questions. I don't know if you know, there used to be is children's paint by numbers, right? So I like to joke that when you're presenting a prospectus, you have to think about this so that you're explaining it so that the not least sophisticated individual, but you want to make it as simple as possible.
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
So that when you open it, you go, oh, great. These reference letters are fabulous. Here is their financial statement, so the revenue financial statement, which is kind of a profit and loss for you as as the individual. And everything makes sense. This says that you have $10 million dollars in the bank. Here are the statements that support the $10 million. Dollars. It says that you have personal property that's worth this amount. Here are the statements. Here are the insurance appraisals that say that it all lines up. If there are questions create uncertainty and doubt. And that's the last thing that you want.
Absolutely. And Nikki, is it you who's preparing the prospectuses for your buyers?
Yes. So we are in many cases with clients at this level, I am working with their team of advisors. We get to a certain point and then I am plugged in with the accountant and the lawyer and all, and so the client is obviously they are aware of what's going on, but I am interfacing with all these individuals, say, here's the statement that we need to have filled out. Every number that is on this, we need all of the supporting documentation. Depending on the buildings, there might be discussions about things that are disclosed versus not disclosed. If someone is buying in a trust, then there are different conversations there. If you're buying in an LLC, and it's also worth noting that from the co op perspective, not every building allows you to purchase in different forms of ownership. So it's very important to understand if you come to me and you say, well, we want to buy this in trust, we have to make sure that the buildings we are looking at allow you to take ownership in that in that structure.
And you're preparing the prospectuses for on behalf of your clients. I guess you have to prepare numerous prospectuses, each as unique for each board's requirements. Is that right?
Yes, every building has its own set of requirements.
Wow, that sounds quite tedious. No.
It can be really quite exhausting,
Yeah.
and it's also so very important to stay attuned of changes, because what if a new board has come in and they have made adjustments to what they require, what they want to see is in terms of post-closing liquidity. Perhaps they have adjusted their down payment requirements. So all of these things requires you to constantly stay on top of sort of the moving target.
Wow. Okay. Um, Thank you for that. I appreciate the detailed explanations. I find it really, really interesting. Never knew any of this. Um, just moving on. How much does privacy drive decisions at the top end?
So let's say hypothetically, you call me up and you're like, I want to buy a fabulous loft in Soho, but I do not want to share an elevator land, right? I want the elevator to open directly into my apartment, right? And it's like, again, this goes back to what is the experience of what you want in a residence? The experience when you walk in the door with the lobby. Do you want there to be a doorman? Do you not want there to be a doorman? Do you want there to be a 24-hour doorman? How many apartments per floor are you okay with? And so all of these nuances, and it's important to figure that out early so that we can find the right properties and the right buildings to go after. Garages. If there's a garage in the building, do you have to leave the building to get to the garage? Can you get to the garage directly from the building? Is there a porte cochere? All of these things matter an incredible amount, especially if privacy is a major concern.
How often do you find that privacy is a major concern? Is it quite frequent or is it lower down the list?
It can be pretty high. It can be pretty high on the list, and I think also it also depends on the experience of living in New York. If you're coming from a place where you've had a secluded estate, that's a very different experience than living in a city of 8.5 million people. The idea the client was says, well, why would I spend $50 million and still have people above me? I'm like, well, is that the experience that you want when you're living here? What is the experience? How do you want to live your life in New York? What experience are you looking for? And then let's try to match that to the relevant property types.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. It seems like you spend a lot of time at the very beginning, just truly, like we said right at the beginning, like the matching process and understanding the client, understanding what they need. And it seems like that's almost or probably possibly one of the most important parts of the process, right?
It's the most important. I consider the time spent at the beginning to be incredibly important
Yeah.
because it frames how the rest of the process,
Yeah.
right? If I can get a very clear understanding of what you are looking for, we are going to be much more efficient in terms of the properties we select. And you can always change and pivot, but if it's too wide too early, then there's confusion, and that does not serve anyone well. If we
Yeah.
figure it out, we see things that fit that criteria. And as we are looking, your decisions may evolve. You may say, you know what, I said I was interested in this, but now that I've seen a couple of places, can we look for this instead? Or can we change this criteria? And I think that spending the time at the beginning makes it a much more efficient process in terms of identifying the properties and then negotiating and getting to the closing. There are the things that you
100%.
don't say, but there's what your body will say when you're walking through a space.
Now, just slightly changing topics. When you walk into a property, is there anything that tells you it was designed to be run well, like with proper space for staff and service, rather than it being added as an afterthought?
So here in New York, we have a couple of really great pre-war architects, Candela and Carpenter and similar. And those homes were designed at a time where you lived differently. So you had your living quarters, you have your staff quarters, you have your entertaining space. Now the challenge today is that sometimes, what we used to call the maids' rooms were really quite small and probably smaller than the office that I'm sitting in. It's always very interesting to go into a newly constructed building and see those elements, those ideas, but in a manner that connects to modern life.
Interesting.
So you have a wonderful primary quarters for, let's say, the owners of the home. You have quarters that might be great for the children. There might be other rooms in the residence that you would think, well, if I have a live-in housekeeper or if I have a live-in nanny, that's the perfect place for them. So you can see that kind of thought. In some of the newer buildings, there have been scenarios where there are smaller apartments that you can only purchase if you are buying one of the larger apartments. So you might buy a smaller apartment that is for your live-in net, as an example. So it's very interesting to see that. I toured a residence recently where it's a condominium downtown. I want to say there were originally seven, maybe 7 units. This property was top maybe 2 floors. And as I was walking through the space, I thought to myself, okay, this is interesting. You can see what the person who, when they bought it and when they bought it as a white box and then designed it for themselves. But clearly, property is on the market for sale. So something has changed. And it's exceptionally well done, but it's also very taste specific. And I was walking around and I'm thinking to myself, where would one do laundry? Even if I am not going to do my own. If I have someone who is working for me and taking care of the children, where are they going to do this? And I'm astonished there was not there were no facilities for the laundry in the apartment.
Wow. Okay.
They had, and this, I won't get into too many specifics because then it would be very easy to identify what the property is. They had also purchased other units in the building because, again, when they were intending to live here, they had one thought in mind. But now you have something that you're trying to sell that doesn't appeal to most people because it was designed for how they live their life. I was talking to a client's household manager a couple of weeks ago, and we were in one of the New York City apartments. And the conversation was basically, this apartment has served its purpose, but we now need a different kind of apartment to serve the purpose for the family. They keep an apartment for guests and when they're hosting people in the city. And the way that we live has changed. So they want for their guests to feel like they are at a 5-star hotel. And this building does not have that as part of its DNA. It's an older building. So we were having the discussion around, what does the family envision? You are at all of their homes around the world. What is the guest experience that they are trying to replicate for their New York City guests? And now with that information, now I am tasked with trying to find apartments in buildings that fit that criteria.
Right.
And this is a perfect example of partnership with the staff that serves the clients and the families. Because there's things that the staff can articulate that the client may not think of because it's not what they do. That's why they have their staff.
When you're talking about the staff, are we talking, which members of staff are we talking about?
I most often deal with the household managers who deal with all of the properties because they're, again, this goes to our conversation before we started recording. We now live in a way where there are certain things that we need as the baseline across all of the properties. So they can explain, well, at the home in Aspen, this is how they like to live. But they also have some of the guests that will visit them in New York are also the guests that spend time with them in Aspen, in London, and in Dubai. That becomes very important because it helps me to narrow down what the client is actually looking for.
Interesting. I didn't know the house manager, for example, would have such a big impact, but yeah, it makes
Yeah, because
complete sense.
often I will end up in the first round of touring. I might be with the house manager who is coming and helping to curate down, and then the client is coming. So I do spend a lot of time with the house managers, and we
Interesting.
have lots of long text message threads.
Good stuff. And then just moving on to the buyers. International buyers are a big part of the New York market. And what do they get right, and what might catch them off guard?
You have to think about the not just the apartment, but the building that you are buying into. How
Mm.
is it being run? What are there any upcoming assessments? What are the fiscal responsibilities? That is so important because you're not just buying your space. You're in essence going into partnership with everything else that's happening in the building. So trying to find out as much as possible about the building. And often, if there's something that you're like, yes, we're very interested and we want to make an offer, before we're making the offer, we are trying to find out as much background and context about what is currently going on in the building
Mm.
or may or may not be planned in the future so that we can adjust accordingly. The negotiation strategy might change, right?
Interesting.
And let's say hypothetically, you are buying and you want this an apartment that you love, but it needs significant renovation. And you may think, well, it's not a big deal. In New York, renovations are can be extraordinarily complicated and they can be extraordinarily expensive. And then you have to contend with the rules of the building.
And Nikki, you said, like, let's say an international buyer's found their ideal property, they're interested, and you said that you need to now find out more information, for example, renovation rules and whatnot. Where do you get that information from? Do you ask the board? Do you ask the neighbors, the residents?
Um, Often this is where who you work with is incredibly important. Like the relationships that we all have with one another. We are going to the management company. We might be able to get a lot of information from them. We should hopefully be able to get quite a bit of information from the listing agent. Perhaps I have previously transacted in the building. Perhaps I know the brokers who recently sold in the building. And so there's a lot of interpersonal information exchange
Yes.
that you will never see on a portal. Like at any given point in a day, I am in a conversation with a colleague, whether it's within my office or at other firms. We are sharing about what we know about what's going on in buildings, changes that we've heard that are happening, or hey, you should know that, building blah, 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 they are just about to have a major assessment for local law 11, or, the elevator has gone out for like the 15th time in that building. This is information that you get from being a good broker and just exchanging information with
Yeah,
colleagues,
and
which is incredibly important.
this is priceless for an international buyer who doesn't have
It's
anything in New
priceless.
York. Yeah, yeah,
No, and also as with an international buyer, I joke that when you hire your broker, we become kind of like the captain of your team. And then we are helping you to recruit the other members in. You will need a lawyer. Okay. Here are 5 lawyers to talk to. And again, I also very firmly believe in matchmaking with the various service providers that I recommend to my clients because I know some people will connect more with some lawyers versus other lawyers.
yeah,
I might have 30 lawyers in general that I love working with, but for you, there may be 3 out of the 30 who would be the right match.
yes, yeah,
Temperament, personality, you will get along, there will be a sense of trust. So do that.
yeah,
You have tax questions, you have questions about tax implications and structures. Okay, I need to refer you to a taxation person. I have some who are very familiar with different parts of the world, so they will understand where you are coming from and then be able to translate how things work here and advise you accordingly. So there's another recommendation.
yeah.
Let's say you do in fact want to try to finance. Okay, so this is like this a constant process of matching people
Yeah,
and making the recommendations.
it's very similar to the recruitment, what the recruiters do. They're like, oh, I know a chauffeur who fits your temperament. I know a nanny who has the languages you need or that you
Right.
want your kid to learn, and
That you
so on.
want your kid to learn.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or I know a nanny that not only knows the languages, but also that nanny's personal value system aligns with your personal value
Yeah.
system.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Now, just moving on to the next question there, Nikki. Once a sale closes and a family takes over, say, a large home, what usually happens on the staffing side? Do the buyers tend to have a household team ready, or are they asking you for referrals?
It depends. Sometimes they have staff ready. Sometimes they are asking for referrals. Sometimes it starts out with a small referral. The first ask is usually, okay, I need a housekeeper who will come regularly even though I'm only going to be there, three times a year. I want something to come through every month. Then they start coming more. They say, oh, can you make a recommendation for a chauffeur? Or can you make a recommendation for a household manager? And often I will recommend in general, once you have more than one property, it would be preferable for you to have one household manager who is then managing everything else out, because I think it becomes too chaotic otherwise. And I think that's something that if this is a new element for you in your life, that becomes the biggest challenge. And what I like to say to clients is if you are now coming into a substantial amount of wealth, however that may be, you need to think about how you assemble your team.
Yeah.
You need teams for your finances, you need legal team, you need a team related to your real estate, you need a team, all of these. And ideally, you are trying to figure this out early in the process, because I think the challenge then becomes you are several years in, and now you have all these disparate teams and different personalities and different systems. And can you tell I was originally a systems kind of person? Try to think about that first. Try to build a better foundation and then expand.
Yeah, yeah. That makes sense. Like in luxury recruitment as well. I asked the co-founder a few months ago, I was like, what's the first hire if you're building a team? And it's like, maybe a estate manager, property manager. And from there, we get them involved. So everything's matching. Everybody's on the same, as you said, the same system, similar
The same
personality.
systems. Even sometimes I say something even as simple as if you need an assistant, hire an assistant, hire and frankly, compensate them well, so that this is then try to find someone who fits into your life so that you have this sense of continuity, because I try to explain that that person is going to be so critical at everybody else.
Yeah, totally agree
Right.
with
I
that.
was talking to someone yesterday. We were talking about how the assistant of this individual had such a big role in then choosing the household manager and the property manager, and all the chain of relationship all traced back to the relationships that this assistant had built with individuals across the course of their life.
So this assistant was in responsible for setting up the teams, and she'd done it
Was
based.
because they get tasked with, oh, this is too much work. I need you to go and find me, source the proposals. And if you're trying to source the proposals, it is natural. Your first step is probably going to be people that you know and that you've worked with in the past.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So it just goes back to how important relationships are.
Okay, then. Nikki, we're coming to the end of this podcast. I just want to say a big thank you. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't, that you think is important for our listeners to know?
I think that the most important thing you can do comes down to the people that you choose to work with,
Mm.
because that will determine a lot about how the process goes. You need to have someone that you trust, someone that is an expert, and start there. Bring in your trusted advisors, whether it's real estate or staffing. You have to bring them in early. It is okay. I spend a lot of time, as I'm sure you do, having lots of introductory conversation. You have to start a conversation to then be able to discern if eventually that's going to be a match for who you want to hire. And I think that people have fear of, I don't want to waste your time. Let's start the conversation.
Yeah, let's just chat first.
Let's just chat first. It does not have to be extraordinarily involved, but let's start that conversation and then let things evolve from there. And I think that you should interview
Mm,
people.
mhm.
And you should ask for recommendations.
Yeah, yeah, totally
You
agree.
you probably you almost certainly have friends and business associates who have had hopefully good experiences with people. But honestly, even if they've had bad experiences, it is useful for you to know who they had a bad experience with so that you don't try and engage that person.
Yeah.
And I think that's so much more valuable. And yes, we have these amazing computers in our hands that it's incredible what these machines can do. But talk to the people that you know and ask them who they have had exceptional experiences with and start there. Yeah,
Definitely.
then yes, you're gonna Google, you're gonna do all sorts of research, but talk to the people that you know. I think that always turns out to be the best source of opportunities and connections.
Yeah, I agree with you there. It's the referrals, and also I remember one person saying like when a person makes a good referral, and the person they made the referral to comes back and says, "Oh, that was good," you feel good. You recommend a restaurant in your local city, your town, village. They come back and they've had a good one, and it feels good to be able to have the confidence to recommend it as well. So yeah, I could completely.
Yeah, and I think, understanding the dynamics of the market, especially when it comes to real estate, I think that in every market there are opportunities. What the opportunities are very much depend on what your goals are and what your interests are. And having the conversation with the experts who can guide you through the differences in the market, the current market data, and help come up with a strategy, that is priceless. And that takes time and that requires having a conversation. Like, you should not be afraid to reach out. I don't believe there's such a thing as wasting time. Have an introductory conversation and see. You may discover, we're not really connecting. I want to work with someone else. That's fine. But have that conversation and try to be as prepared as possible so that in particular when you come to a market like New York, you have a basic awareness already.
Yeah, that's very wise. Very, very good advice there, Nikki. So we're going to, I think we're at the end of my questions. I just want to say massive thank you again, Nikki, for taking the time for talking.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it and I learned an absolute ton. And I hope our listeners did as well. And if you do want to find out more information, you can go to householdstaff.agency and there you'll find the Morgan Malley website and for household staff in yachts, yacht staff in hospitality. And also you could find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Deezer, and plenty more platforms. And where would our listeners find you, Nikki? What's the best contact? What's the best way to get in contact with you? Say if our international listeners are interested in purchasing a property in New York, for
I
example.
would think that the best way is probably so my website, so nikkisellsnyc.com. You can also go to nikkibeauchamp.com, very, very simple. And my social handles on most of the platforms is Nikki Beauchamp. So I like to think that I'm easy to find.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, and wishing you a beautiful day.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure.